Welcome to Euroz Hartley's Finding the Front, where we get to know the people who front some of Western Australia's leading companies, providing you with real insights into the way they think and approach things, both in business and in life. So get the volume adjusted in your car or your headphones sorted and settle in for a great story. Here's your host, Tim Banfield.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Euroz Hartley's Finding the Front. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Euroz Hartley's is a proudly Western Australian leading financial services business, specialising in the provision of corporate finance, wealth management, stockbroking, institutional sales and targeted research services. If you'd like to learn more about the services we provide, please don't hesitate to visit our website at www.eurozhartleys.com. Well, what an opportunity we have in this episode. We get to chat with veteran exploration and mining legend Dr Mark Bennett, the Executive Chairman of S2 Resources, stock code S2R. Mark has an enviable exploration track record of finding mineral deposits and building mines. He hails from Birmingham in the West Midlands of England, eventually arriving in Australia on the sniff of a chance of a job in geology. Well, the rest is history, with Mark, amongst other things, making massive discoveries, such as the Thunderbox gold deposit and the Nova-Bollinger nickel copper deposit. He was twice awarded the prestigious AMEC Prospector of the Year award in 2002 and over 10 years later in 2013. Mark was also the founding managing director and CEO of well-known success story Sirius Resources, which was ultimately acquired by IGO for $1.8 billion in 2015. This is a ripper. So without further ado, it gives me a huge pleasure to introduce to Euroz Hartley's Finding the Front, the Executive Chairman of S2 Resources and all-round great guy, Dr. Mark Bennett. Hi Mark, and thanks very much for joining me on Euroz Hartley's Finding the Front. It really is fantastic to have you on the show, and particularly because you're only in Perth for a short while, being over from Melbourne, it's just awesome that you could fit us into your schedule and take some of your valuable time out to join us. So thanks a lot.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Great to be here.
Good on you. Mark, there is so much to cover. And before we kick off on this stellar career and what has been a really interesting life, we haven't had anyone on the show yet that was born around 160 kilometres from London in the West Midlands region of England in a famous place called Birmingham. So what a great place to start. How good?
Yeah, it's a bit different from Perth, that's for sure. Yeah. No, I was sort of lived the early part of my life in Birmingham, and I always knew I'd be somewhere else in the end because what I was interested in would take me somewhere else. So in the end, I found myself over here.
And you're the youngest of three kids?
Yeah, I had a sister and a brother, both quite a lot older than me. So by the time I was 7 or 8, they'd virtually left home. So I was, in effect, an only child, so I had to make my own fun.
Yeah, and then tell us about that. How was it growing up in Birmingham?
Birmingham at the time, it was a sort of fairly grim industrial city.
Yes.
The Northern Ireland troubles were on. There were bombs going off locally.
Right.
So it was a pretty interesting place to live.
Did you spend much time outdoors?
Yeah, I I grew up in the suburbs, and when I was probably 13, 14, I got the chance to go out on some hikes and stuff through school and got to go to some of the nicer places in England outside of Birmingham.
Yes.
And that sort of sparked an interest in geology, the landscape, all that sort of stuff.
Tell me, did you enjoy school per se when you were going through primary school at Birmingham?
Yeah, school wasn't bad. I sort of failed when you were 11 years old in the UK at the time, you did a thing called the 11 plus exam. And if you were smart and passed it, you went to a good school. And if you weren't, you went to another school. And I went to another school.
Oh, okay.
But it was a good school, and it did a thing called the Duke of Edinburgh Award, which got me out and about.
Yes.
And Unusually for schools, it actually did geology as a subject, which is one of the things that sort of got me interested in it.
Right, and that's where it started.
Yeah.
Tell us, what did your mum and dad do as a general, occupation?
Yeah, look, classic sort of working class family. My dad was a floor tiler. My mum was a housewife. My dad had a few problems. He drank a lot and gambled a lot, but he was a good guy, and I think he had what we now call PTSD from being in World War II.
Is that right?
Yeah. So he was either trying to, escape from reality or win a new one.
Yes, yes. Was it clearly that was a bit of a tough time in terms of him and where that all ended up?
That wasn't a happy marriage. And so I sort of took the initiative when I was 15 to leave home. And,
is that right?
Yeah. And sort of set myself up and carried on from there.
Well, that would have taught you a bit about independence.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Gosh.
And I had to, ride a push bike probably 25 k's to school and back each day.
So the school that you ended up going to was about 25 kilometres from home.
Yeah.
From where you moved out to.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And that was every day, morning, and then ride home at night.
Yep. Yeah.
Gosh, it would have taught you not only independence, but a bit about life and living and making ends meet, I would have thought.
Oh, sure. It was pretty tough, but it was. I also, in a strange way, like the independence.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Coming back to those excursions when you were at school, apart from having geology as one of the subjects at school, was those excursions pretty important in terms of just getting out and about in the outdoors? When you look now at what your career has unfolded to be, which was all about the outdoors, was it really formative?
Oh, yeah, central to it, I think. It got me out of Birmingham, which is a fairly sort of grim place to be. It got me seeing lots of places and things, thinking about how things formed.
Yep.
Collecting rocks. I mean, I was collecting rocks even before then. For some reason, I was collecting rocks when I was 4, and my mum did me a favour of putting them in her suitcase and taking them home.
Is that right? What do you remember? Why rocks?
I don't know. It just fascinated me. I guess kids, they get fascinated by things like volcanoes and dinosaurs and space and that sort of stuff. And ultimately, that's all geology. So that sort of led me into that.
So with regards to rocks, clearly it became a pretty big focal point in your life, okay? But it really took turn early. When you would look at the way when you left school, you went on to university. Now, was that geology unit that you did at secondary school enough to say, right, well, this is my pathway? This is where I want to be?
That's what made me want to do it.
Yes.
But my qualifications were the complete opposite.
That was the challenge.
Yeah. I'd sort of done mainly arts things. And, to get into uni to do geology at the time, you needed physics, chemistry, maths, and maybe geology.
Right.
And I had the maybe.
Okay, yes. If I was to say you knew what you wanted to do when you left school, it was geology though. Without marks aside, that was the destination.
Yeah. And fortunately, when I applied, I just lucked on getting a sympathetic interviewer, professor at Leicester University, who probably saw my enthusiasm.
Yes.
And so despite not having the qualifications to get in, he gave me a place.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That was luck.
Oh, yeah, totally.
I don't think that would have happened too many times, would it? Or? No. So that's how you ended up in the course, which ended up being a Bachelor of Science with, when you completed, you got an honours in geology.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So during that time, how did you get to experience around geology? What did you do to enhance your career prospects, and did you do any part-time work or?
Yeah, well, the courses at that time, you had to do a lot of field work in vacation time.
Yes.
So it was a lot of different places we went and did that, and that actually stopped you doing other jobs because you were busy doing field work.
Yes.
But one of the things on that course is between the second and third year, we were encouraged to take a year out and get a job to experience what the real world's like. So I ended up, by chance, getting a job with a company called North Broken Hill in New South Wales, in Burke. And my exploration manager was Ian Plimer before he was famous for all sorts of other stuff.
Right. Is that right?
Yeah.
So how did you apply for the role from Birmingham?
Yeah.
And they came through and said, yeah,
Yeah,
we'll have you.
Yeah, providing you paid for your own air ticket.
Yeah, right. Okay. That would have been a challenge at that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, so the commitment to get to this geology style role was such that you came out. Well, how long was that for? 12 months.
Yeah, and then went back and finished the final year and got the degree.
Yes.
And then applied for jobs, but there'd been a boom whilst I was doing my degree and a bust when I finished it, so there weren't many jobs going.
At the time?
Yeah.
So that's why you went on and did your masters?
PhD.
PhD, should I say.
So I thought, how am I going to keep my hand in the game here? And I didn't want to be an academic, but the only thing was to do a PhD, so I did that at Leeds.
So at the University of Leeds.
Yeah.
And that was a PhD in geochemistry.
Yeah.
And I was reading and sedimentology of Cambrian manganese deposits of northern Wales and Newfoundland.
Yeah, it's quite a long way from looking for gold in Australia.
And also from Burke, where you just did...
And Burke, yeah.
Gosh, and how did you find that, doing the PhD? Because you're actually Dr Mark Bennett.
Yeah, for my sins. So doing a PhD is a bit of a slog. And it's a sort of sorting hat in that it determines who's prepared to do the slog for a start and have the initiative to do stuff that you're not taught and come up with original stuff. So what I got out of that was really, I guess, determination to finish something.
Yes.
And the ability to frame problems and think them through and try and solve them.
So you look back on, you often run into younger people that are debating whether or not to go on and do a PhD or a master's and that sort of thing. And the way you reflect on it, it was really important in your development?
It was, but I always regarded it as a stepping stone rather than an end.
Yes.
Some people, I think, when they do get a PhD, they think, that's it, I've got a PhD. Mission accomplished sort of thing.
Yes.
But I think in hindsight, when you actually get a proper job afterwards, you realise that you've still not learned very much until you're actually out on the ground.
Yeah, in the field.
Yeah.
Yes. So once you've done your PhD, here we are, Dr Mark Bennett, and there are still no jobs. Is that right?
Well, there was another boom whilst I was doing my PhD and another bust at the end of it.
Oh, is that right? So your timing wasn't too good.
No.
Tell me, what was some of the first jobs you started out when you left PhD?
It was scraping the barrel. So in between periods of unemployment and living in bed sits, there were a couple in particular I remember. One was working as a guide down a tourist cave. I think I was getting £5 a day for that or something. And
right.
In that case, I had to cycle 50 Ks a day there, each way, there and back. That lasted for a while. I was involved in disposing of radioactive waste beneath Manchester for a while, which is where they seem to put it all.
Underneath Manchester?
Yeah.
Is that a Manchester secret?
I don't know if the people in Manchester know about it.
Gosh. Well, that was an interesting part-time job.
Yeah, absolutely. And then those sort of little things ran out, and for lack of anything else and for the money mainly, I ended up joining the infantry as well for a while.
How was that?
Yeah, pretty strange. This was in the Cold War before the Berlin Wall had come down. So, it was the West versus the Russians, funnily enough.
Yes.
And our role as light infantry was to rush to West Germany in the event that the Russians started an attack. So it was sort of, a few regiments of light infantry versus 20 divisions of Russian tanks. Our purpose was just to slow them down a bit before the Yanks got across. And our nickname was the Speed Bumps.
That doesn't fill you full of enthusiasm. Did you look back at that time in the infantry fondly, or did you come away with a discipline that you probably otherwise wouldn't have received?
I think a little bit of discipline, and I came away probably shocked at the sort of people that are in the infantry.
Right.
Which you wouldn't want to meet down a dark alley.
Yeah, sure. Very well, highly trained and very, very good at what they do in terms of combat.
Yeah.
So those 3 part-time roles, in the meantime, were you looking for roles in geology? You probably didn't have much time if you were...
Well, yeah, in between times I was continually sort of writing applications to companies in Australia.
Right.
And this was also still apartheid in South Africa. So there were jobs in South Africa, but nobody wanted to go there.
Okay.
And I didn't want to go there.
Yes.
And, I spent 12 months writing applications, getting knocked back. And one day I got a thing from a South African company saying, yeah, we'll give you a job, but I didn't want that one.
Yes.
In the meantime, after 12 months of doing this, I'd got a letter from WMC saying, look, there's no jobs, but if you're ever passing through Adelaide, we'll give you an interview. So I bought a ticket, took out a bank loan, sold everything, bought a ticket, and got on a plane, not knowing whether I'd just have to go back to South Africa or I'd get something in Australia.
Yes.
Turned up at the WMC office in Adelaide and had an interview with a guy called Hamish Patterson, which went well, but he said, look, sorry, there's just no jobs, but thanks for coming. And literally, as I was just about to stand up and leave, his phone rang and he put it down. He says, oh, a geologist just resigned in Kalgoorlie, you've got a job.
No way.
Yeah. So that was one of those sliding door moments.
What year were we here, Mark?
That was 89.
89. So you're about 29 there.
Yeah.
You're 29. You've just been able to land your first geologist role.
Yeah.
From Birmingham to Kalgoorlie.
Yes.
Via Adelaide. And,
Via
and on the
Adelaide.
basis of that one phone call, which happened to happen while you were there.
Yeah, yeah.
Having sold all your valuables and belongings to get the plane flight over.
Yeah, yeah.
And a bank loan.
Yeah, yeah.
Gee. That job couldn't have come any faster.
Oh, no, it was amazing. And
so tell us about it. Like, you packed your bags and straight out of Adelaide and straight to Kalgoorlie.
Yeah, and my wife flew across, or well, she wasn't my wife then, but she was shortly afterwards, flew across, and as we took a small Sky West plane from Perth into Kalgoorlie. And as it was coming to land in Kalgoorlie, she sort of looked out the window and she said, what are we landing here for?
Welcome to home.
Yeah.
So that's Kathy.
That's Kathy, yeah.
Yeah, well, shout out to Kathy. Well done, Kathy. Landed in Kalgoorlie, and that was the start. Because Western Mining, I mean, you would have known when you flew in, that was just such a credible outfit, the top of the pops in terms of opportunities to get a solid foundation and basis for geology.
Oh, absolutely. A couple of the profs at uni back in the UK were very aware of WMC,
Yes.
and it was still in the period not long after the discovery of Olympic Dam, where they were regarded as superstars, really.
Yes, yes. So that period of time in Kalgoorlie, you spent, well, with Western Mining as a whole, you were there for around 8 years.
Yeah, yeah.
5 of which were in Kalgoorlie and then 3 in Africa.
Yes.
That's right?
And a year at St Ives in between.
Right, okay. So how did you find it when you first started? Boots on the ground, here you are in Kalgoorlie, late 90s, late 80s. We'd just been through the crash. So the industry's getting back on its feet.
Yeah, I got shown an office, given a bunch of files telling me that that's what you do to pay the rents on the tenements, given a Land Cruiser, pointed east, said go there and have a look at some rocks. Without much sort of training, it was a real dropping in the deep end sort of process.
Right.
And went out there and first I thought, well, where are all the bloody rocks? There's none sticking out the ground.
Yeah.
And so Australia's a lot different from what I was used to. So that was a big learning curve in itself.
And how did you learn? Who were your sort of guides and,
Yeah, I was lucky that, WMC had a lot of really good people. And my direct boss was Chris Bonwick, who started IGO.
Okay.
And Chris was great. He was the most enthusiastic person I think I've met.
And did he start the training around what you needed to look for within, goldfield style landscapes to find what you were looking for?
Yeah, there were a lot of people around who you could learn from, and they were big on putting you on courses as well.
Yes.
With experts. So, yeah, I learnt probably more in 5 years there than I'd learnt in the previous 10, easy.
Is that right? Yeah. What did you love about the goldfields when you started there?
Oh, it's just unique, sort of arid landscape, big skies. And one of my jobs was reconnaissance. So I'd basically get in a Land Cruiser with an HF radio and head out for 2 weeks prowling around, not see another person.
Yes.
And one of the really great things actually was at night you'd roll your swag out on the ground and you'd stare up and you'd just look at the sky with clear sky full of stars. It just really made you realise how tiny this planet is in a huge universe, and to the extent that you just feel like you're going to fall off it.
Yes, yes. And you were doing this for, well, at that point it's 5 years of exploration geologist.
Yeah.
So you and Chris were quite close in terms of your working relationship for that period of time.
Yep.
Then tell us about the underground.
WMC was big on making sure that explorers also got underground experience so they know what they're looking for looks like in reality. So, I spent a year down there working underground at the Victory gold mine, and that was great from the point of view of learning that and learning about all the roles involved in mining and the people that actually do it.
Yes.
Which is just as important. It was a really good sort of learning time with a few dodgy moments along the way.
Right, okay. You had an experience around mine plans and developing mines over time. Was that formative, that period where you spent underground with WMC?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Knowing the small details like the small-scale geometry of something and how you can miss it or go off course and dilute ore bodies, or where a jumbo will fit and if you can follow a particular seam or not. They're all the little things that make the difference between something that looks good on paper and the actual performance in reality.
Yes, yes. Mark, one of the responsibilities that you had there was to do with delineation and modelling of the Conqueror ore body.
Yeah.
So that would have been quite an interesting experience in itself.
Yeah, it was. That was basically a lot of underground mapping that hadn't been done before and sort of constructing a new 3D model so that the guys putting the development drives in the mine could not be distracted by red herrings and stick to a plan.
Yes.
And I was told actually later by Ed Ainscoe, who was running St Ives for Goldfields after they bought it, that they were still using my model sort of 10, 15 years later.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So the time in Kalgoorlie you look back on fondly, there would have met some characters through that period.
Plenty of characters, a few prospectors I know, a couple of shift bosses, a few drinks down the foundry every now and again.
Yeah. Good times?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Kathy enjoyed it?
She did. She actually, and this is the amazing thing about a place like Australia, is that she came there from the UK and ended up being a TV presenter. She used to do the Saturday Disney Club and read the news. So she worked with people like Michael Usher, who's Channel 7 or 9 reporter now, and Natalie Barr.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Gosh. So she did that in Kalgoorlie?
Yeah, GWN.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that didn't last forever though, because off you went to Africa. Did Kathy go with you to Africa? No. She said, no, Bali's.
That's right.
Mark, I'll let you go there.
Yeah.
So you went off there 3 years as a country manager for Western Mining in Africa and predominantly in Burkina Faso.
Yeah, so WMC was sort of trying to stretch its wings and go from just an Australian company to an international company, and Roy Woodall sort of roped me in to assist with that process in the West African bit. So I went there, again doing a lot of reconnaissance, understanding the mining laws, meeting government people and stuff like that, and was, I guess, the first to go in there and set up an office in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso.
Yes. And
peg some ground. And one of those prospects we started drilling is now sort of multi-million ounce gold mine as well.
Right. How did you find it? I mean, first time in Burkina?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they're, Burkina, Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, they're all sort of ex-French colonies, so everything's in French as well. And it's Napoleonic law that you've got to fathom out too, which ain't easy. But it was at a point where there was a big gold mine in Ghana, Ashanti, but not much else, and a bit of artisanal mining all over the place. And the French had done a good job of mapping this all out, but not commercialising it. So it had been a government agency that had done that.
Right.
And the Canadians were just sensing an opportunity, and the Canadian juniors were just coming in, and we were there alongside them.
Okay. Now, you were working under Roy Woodall for that time.
Yeah.
I did a little bit of research around Roy. He's a very famous geologist. In fact, I was reading an obituary in the Bulletin. It stated that Roy commenced working for Western Mining Corporation as a geologist. He remained with WMC until his retirement in 1995, and he was a non-executive director until 2001. And the quote there I just pulled out was, along with the exploration team he established and nurtured for decades, he discovered more than 150 mineral deposits until 1995. I think he started in something like 1953, something like that. So working with him, Mark, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Roy was a legend, really, and he set about recruiting probably a couple of hundred geos for WMC, and he gave them enough rope to do their own thing.
Yes.
And that's why it was such a successful organisation in that period. But, you know, he didn't suffer fools either, so he could be pretty harsh at times.
Yes.
But working in that environment and other people that were close with Roy Woodall as well, like a guy called Tim O'Driscoll, who's passed away now as well. These were sort of pioneers in their field, so you could just soak all this stuff up, which was great.
Do you think when you look further down the track from where you are at that point, you know, that formative training that you got from Chris Bronwick and Roy Woodall really enabled you to get where you wanted to go? Like, do you feel privileged to have had that upbringing?
Oh, totally. I'm still amazed that just by, you know, chance, that phone call in Adelaide, that I got to benefit from all of that.
Yes.
And a lot of geologists don't. And particularly these days, with there being fewer of that style of company, geologists just tend to be put in a box and don't get the chance to learn all this stuff and be quite narrowly focused.
When you say learn, tell us a little bit about what you see as critical for foundation when you look at geology, and then what you learnt that enabled you to then go on, and it will get to it, but you got some pretty big achievements from this point onwards when you decided to go out on your own. But this foundation, I'm just interested, you know, what were the key points that you took away from that upbringing with WMC, which, as I said earlier, it was 8 years of the start of your career? You
need to have good science, and you need to be plugged into all of that. But it's a mistake to think that looking for mineral deposits is all about science. It's as much an art as a science. And I think in a funny way, that's how I think my school qualifications actually gave me an advantage, because I wasn't just rigidly logical about everything.
Yes.
So, you know, knowing when to put the pedal to the metal, knowing when to ease off, just having an intuitive feel about the landscape and what it's telling you and how things develop, they all sort of go into the mix, and it's a strange process. It's very intuitive,
yes.
Much more so than I think most people would say.
A lot of gut feel involved?
Yeah, it's, you know, they call it gut feel, but what they call gut feel, I think, is just this subconscious library of knowledge that you've
accumulated experience. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's when you sort of embrace the guys like Roy and Chris, and it just all sort of gradually subsides in, and you start to, it becomes part of your everyday language in terms of looking at the geology of the regions you're in.
Yeah, and through that, sort of gaining the conviction of your own beliefs as well, and being prepared to
back yourself
and face a little bit of criticism here or there.
Well, I'll tell you what, you had some experiences through that period, but I just wanted to, when we were talking offline, give us a couple of highlights from your time in Africa. I know you did get cerebral malaria.
Yes.
which wouldn't have been ideal.
Which is the worst kind and can kill you in 24 hours.
My goodness.
But no, that was, you know, we were all taking the medication to protect ourselves. And I actually came back to Australia and stopped after the prescribed period, and then came down with it then. So it was lurking in my system.
Right.
But fortunately, I was back here when it happened and was diagnosed pretty quickly.
Yes.
Otherwise, basically what happens with cerebral malaria is your brain clogs up with dead red blood cells and kills you.
Gee, Mark. Well, that was a good result that you got on top of that.
Yeah.
Some other close calls?
Yeah, a little bit of a misunderstanding in Mali one day, where some of the local guys who didn't speak English got a bit upset with my presence and pressed an AK-47 against my head and did a lot of shouting.
Gee, yeah. Okay.
So, that was interesting. And, one of the more bizarre moments was when I was working in the Sahara Desert in the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, and we'd driven out into the desert to look at some prospects. And unbeknown to us, because we didn't have any comms or anything, the same day, the plane that was flying to the same place crashed and everybody was killed. My boss thought I might be on the plane, so I called my wife up to tell her. So, and I didn't know about this. I was merrily wandering around in the Sahara, blissfully unaware. And then, 3 or 4 days later, I got back into somewhere where I could actually make a call and just called her up. And until then, she'd thought I was dead for 3 or 4 days.
Oh, my goodness.
I think she was disappointed.
I don't think so. Was Kathy in Kalgoorlie still at this point?
No, actually Melbourne.
She's gone to Melbourne.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What a terrifying few days for her.
Yeah. I think she'd sort of got used to some of the things that happen in Africa by that point, but that was sort of taking it to a new level.
Gosh, we of course in today's world we take communication for granted, but when you're a geologist at that period, there wasn't any communication. No,
I remember we used the first sat phone actually, and it was in a briefcase, and 3/4 of the briefcase was a battery to power the sat phone because it only lasted about 10 minutes.
Right.
So we used to have to charge it pretty regularly, and there weren't many places to charge it. So we found this little mud hut basically with a genset and asked if we could plug this in to recharge it to use the phone. And the guy refused to let us because he thought that he'd get the phone bill.
Oh, well, did you get through? Did you end up using it at all in the end? Did you convince him that you wouldn't?
We eventually used it, and I called a number in Australia. It rang out for about 10 minutes, and then somebody answered it, and it was a guy in a radio astronomy observatory in the UK, and there was this phone ringing in the basement, and he thought it was ET or something.
Gosh. Some of the experiences, you look back and laugh, but I mean, they're amazing, really, aren't they?
Yeah.
Do you look back at that time in Africa almost, fondly?
Fondly now I've survived it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's lots more stories than that. So I keep on meaning to write them down and put them in a book because it's larger than life.
So I gather that, you eventually thought, right, well, it's time to move from my role with WMC in Africa and then look at something else.
Yep.
And that was where you then decided to come back to Perth and you joined a junior then called Forestania Gold, which ultimately became Lionel.
Yes, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that transition.
So I joined Forestania Gold. They had the Bounty gold mine at the time. It wasn't going well. It was losing money. And this takeover was happening with Lionel, which was effectively a shell listed on the TSX. So I spent a couple of years out in the bush near Leinster, pretty well on my own, camping, and that's ultimately what led to finding Thunderbox. But there was a point in the early days with Lionel where, because of the situation at Bounty, the chairman reckoned he had more money in his pocket than the company had in its bank account.
Right.
And it was on the precipice. And then we discovered Thunderbox and its fortunes turned. And then with the development of Thunderbox and finding a couple of nickel mines after that, and then the nickel price going for a run, Lionel ended up getting taken out by Norilsk. So it started off at 40 million market cap and ended up being taken out for over 7 billion.
So repeat that, 40 million to 7 billion.
Yeah.
On the back of the discoveries that you were able to put together?
In part, and on the back, Thunderbox was a pretty critical turning point, and some of the nickel mines as well. And really the nickel price spiking was the sort of perfect storm as well.
Yes.
And, there were a couple of companies that got in a bidding war for it. One of them was Norilsk. Rumour has it that they needed Putin's permission to make the bid.
Right.
And once they'd got it, they didn't want to go back and say they'd lost, so it just kept on going up and up.
So we're talking here 1997 to 2006. So you had 9 years with Lionel.
Yeah.
And that was the result in the end.
Yeah.
So I just want to highlight this period of time because you casually mentioned you've found Thunderbox and a couple of nickel mines. Well, as you say, they went on to be pretty significant discoveries. So much so that in 2002, you received the Association of Mining and Exploration Companies, AMEC's, Prospector of the Year award for Thunderbox and Waterloo discoveries. That must have been an enormous feeling of pride in terms of your reward for your effort. 2 years out there by yourself largely, prospecting for ground. Let's start with Thunderbox. How did it start? Yeah, and where did you come up with that name? I know since Saracen have been there with Ral and now it's with Northern Star.
Yeah.
You found it. You named it.
I named it.
And how did you come up with it?
It was pretty primitive conditions camping out in the bush. So the dunny was just an old drill hole with a 44-gallon drum over the top, and that was the Thunderbox.
I thought it might have been connected.
Yeah, and that was another one of those sliding door moments as well, because we liked a particular stretch of ground that might have gold in it, and we drilled 2 reconnaissance lines of holes across it, 400 metres apart, about 40 holes in total. So we drilled the first line, moved to the second line, and at the end of that line there was a creek in flood and we couldn't get across to drill the last 2 holes.
Right.
So having drilled 38 of the 40 holes, it would have been tempting to say, well, let's call it quits now, it's just getting too hard. But we persisted and got the rig around the creek and drilled the last 2 holes. And it was pretty well the last sample in the last hole that was the first discovery of Thunderbox.
Is that right? How deep did you go?
That was about 80, 90 metres down, something like that.
Yes. And this was your first major discovery?
Yeah.
Like of your life?
And when we drilled the follow-up holes and it kept on getting wider and wider,
yes,
a lot of people thought we were just drilling down dip rather than drilling across it. But it was a different style of deposit. It was much wider than most gold deposits. It was sort of 80 metres thick. So when it was mined, it was more like a quarry than a gold mine.
Right.
And at the time, it's only a 2.5 gram ore body, but it's so wide that the ounces per vertical metre are pretty high.
Yes.
Normandy described it as a 2 gram graveyard, but it paid off its entire capex in 9 months.
Wow. That's a return.
Yeah.
Gosh. I just want to come back to that. I said gut feel, but that sense of smarts around a prospect or when and when not to drill. What was it? Because this relates to the next discovery as well, but what was it that caught your eye with Thunderbox to make you think, right, guys, this is worth persevering? Because opportunities within an exploration license or a tenement are numerous. And you've got to know where to spend the money on where to drill. And the drill is the source of truth, and you've got to be able to back that in. And that's where you said you've got to back yourself and be willing to wear the risk. What gave you that willingness to wear the risk on Thunderbox?
Oh, a couple of things, but probably where we had the first sniff of gold in that last hole.
Yes.
The clay, because it was still weathered rock, it wasn't rock, was a particular orange colour, and we weren't going to drill any more holes, but we drilled a few anyway, and we started getting thicker and thicker intervals of this unusual orange-coloured material. And even though we didn't have any assays for it at the time, and we're sort of risking it a bit, spending that money, we backed ourselves, I guess, and they started coming back with gold as well. And then we put the first RC holes in, and we basically drilled it and got, I think it was 96 metres at 5 grams, and the only reason we didn't crack the ton was because we ran out of drill rods.
Is that right?
Yeah. So it's just being prepared to, take the risk. If you're risk averse, you shouldn't be exploring.
Yeah.
And that's why I like smaller companies, because you can do that. The bigger the company, the more you have to justify what you're doing.
Yes.
And the more it gets justified in spreadsheets and things like that, so it loses its reality. And some middle manager just makes a decision based on probabilities.
Right. When you came out of that Thunderbox discovery and you did win the award for Prospector of the Year, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was great. It was, I guess, I felt it was worth all the effort.
Yeah.
From all those years ago.
Yes.
So.
Well, Mark, at this point, and we're at 2002 when you received that award.
Yep.
You come a long way. You, as you say, that phone call in Adelaide with WMC was just the start, let alone doing your PhD in Birmingham, studying, getting allowed in without really the marks to to allow you into university. And all that time spent before that, when it goes right back to kicking or picking up rocks and your mum would help you collect them. You know, here we are. You've just been named Prospector of the Year for finding Thunderbox, which is still being mined as we speak.
Yeah.
I mean...
No, it was great. You know, the personal satisfaction was brilliant. It was also a turning point because I got given a bottle of wine for my efforts, which was great. But some of the guys who'd, you know, put their own money on the line as shareholders in our joint venture partner made a lot of money from that, which was brilliant. They were hugging and dancing. And that's when I thought, I don't want to be an employee anymore. I want a bit of that.
Yes. You could see the other side.
Yeah.
Well, look, I just to reinforce that for the listener. So Lion Ore, as we mentioned, went from a $40 million market cap company to a takeout by Norilsk at $7.4 billion. The Russian metals giant Norilsk. Mark won that Prospector of the Year award for Thunderbox and the Waterloo discoveries. And for the point of view of going forward, I just want to highlight what that AMEC, the AMEC website, which is the Association of Mining and Exploration Companies, Prospector of the Year award, they give a really good highlight on that. The prestigious AMEC Prospector Award for individual endeavour in the field of mineral exploration was first presented in 1993. It is awarded to the individuals who made the most outstanding mineral deposit discovery within recent years. The award recognises both the discovery and the individuals and or the geoscientific team responsible for the discovery rather than the company. So it was an honour to be awarded that. Being your own boss, well, it started out with Apex Minerals. And here we are in 2006, so we've moved on from Lion Ore after 9 years. You're out on your own, and Apex Minerals has lasted for about 3 years. And I think from what we were talking about offline, it was a learning curve.
Yeah, it sure was. Yeah, one I didn't particularly want to have at the time, but now it's in the past. It was a pretty good learning curve. So it was a way to, you know, learn what not to do. Yeah, it was pretty painful at the time. There were a few fairly savage experiences along the way that taught me a lot too.
Well, this role, you were running it.
I was the exploration director.
Right. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, you were running the exploration side of this company.
Yeah.
What did you learn? What did you learn in essence? Because you were out on your own. Effectively, you were taking a position in the company and looking to build it.
I learned that the composition of the board and the personalities are paramount.
Right.
If you get that wrong, everything else is irrelevant.
Okay.
If the board isn't, you know, running the company in the best possible way and openly, then it's really difficult to achieve anything.
Okay, yes. Because that was a pretty important learning curve from what I can gather, because it wasn't long until in 2009 you set up and was managing director and CEO of Sirius Resources.
Yes. The things I took away from Apex were a lot of commercial and legal stuff. Prior to that, I'd been pretty well technical.
Yes.
So that's where I started sort of spreading my wings a bit. And so I was able to set Sirius up again through another sliding door moment, really, in that Mark Creasy, who was the biggest landholder in WA and had funded his own ground with his own money for a long time, and got to the point where he thought, I want somebody else to spend money on my ground for a change.
Right.
So I was prepared to give up a bit of equity in turn for putting it into a public vehicle and having it funded by the markets. So I was just there at the right time, and we sort of knew one another from the Apex days.
Yes. With
him having been a shareholder of that. And so we basically took a shell that Mark controlled, which was the old Croesus Mining. I raised the initial $10 million to fund it. I was able to sort of cherry pick some of Mark's ground holdings to stick into Sirius for stock, so he ended up as a 30% shareholder.
Yes.
And renamed the company Sirius, and we said, you know, we'll give ourselves 3 years, we'll spend the money and do or die trying. This
is an interesting part. 3 years. So we know the result with Sirius, and for those who aren't familiar with it, you're about to hear of a super successful story. Sirius discovered and developed the Nova-Bollinger nickel copper mine in WA, right? Now, that was part of the Creasy package which you put into the company.
Yep.
Your role was to develop those land packages or those tenement packages. Okay. Now, from 2009, if we fast forward, IGO bought Sirius for $1.8 billion in September 2015. What was the market cap when you started? You raised $10 million.
Raised $10 million. Well, the market cap immediately before we found Nova, which was 2 years and 11 months into that, 3 years,
yes,
was about $7 million.
Right. So it's a super success story. Tell us a little bit about this now, Mark, because, okay, you've got some pedigree behind you. You're now backing yourself in. Mark Creasy's backing you in, and you have to produce on that tenement package. What were the catalysts to this discovery of Nova? Because I've got lots of questions, but just listening to the way you looked at that package and went, right, okay, how am I going to work this out?
Yeah, well, BHP had been there a few years previously and written it off as not being the right sort of ground at all. Inco had been a big nickel company, had been in there and kicked a few rocks but not really followed through. So it had sat there for a long time and Creasy had sat on it. The WA government, through the Geological Survey, had done some regional sampling of all of southern WA. And one sample in that particular district was anomalous in nickel and copper. But it was only one sample every 20 square Ks or something, so fairly unreliable.
Spaced out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. But that sort of attracted us to it, and initially we called it the GSWA anomaly after the Geological Survey of Western Australia. And so that drew us to it. We also got the government geophysics, and we looked at that and we saw structures in it that we thought would be the right sort of structures for nickel.
Yes.
Which coincided with it. So we ended up doing some soil sampling over it and some geophysics, and we got an anomaly that lit up in the geophysics that was far too big to be plausible. And normally when you're doing that sort of geophysics, you look for the pimples on the side of the big bumps rather than just the big bumps.
Yes.
So for a while, I guess we didn't drill it because we were assuming it must just be something other than mineralisation. In the end, we thought, well, we can't not drill this. So we decided to drill it. But by this point, we literally hardly had any money left in the bank.
Can I just pause you there? The geophysics side of it,
yeah.
You're referring to the ground EM, the
yes.
ground electromagnetics?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, my understanding was you were quite innovative here in terms of you would take onto the ground and do these ground electromagnetics that enabled you to get an electrical pulse that would come through from what was underneath.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And did that electrical pulse provide you with a gut feel that this was something different? And that's where you're saying this was bigger than just the pimple on the side. This was significant. Is that where it started? Is that what gave you that feeling that, geez, we've got to pursue this?
Yeah, it was the biggest anomaly of that kind that I'd ever seen.
Yep.
But when you know,
the electromagnetics proved that to you.
Yes, yeah. And
did you have a gut feel that it was that beforehand?
Well, it was a bit scary, you know. When you see something that looks too good to be true, it's generally too good to be true.
Yes.
So it's a bit intimidating in a way.
Yep.
But we eventually drilled it, and at the 11th hour, and we hit it. So it's a funny story in that we could only afford to drill 3 more holes, and that was it.
This is
curtains.
So you found it?
No, this was before.
Before,
yeah.
Right? So then you found this anomaly.
We got this anomaly. We've only got enough money to drill 3 more holes, and then we're broke. Where are we going to stick them? And we sort of ummed and ahed about exactly where to put them, because if we'd have put them too far one way, we would have overshot. If we put them too far the other way, it would have been too deep and we couldn't reach. So we had one real throw of the dice to get this.
Yes.
And it was modelled to be at a depth of 160 metres. And at about 7 o'clock at night, we got to 159 metres, and it was dark, and we thought we could see a few sparkly bits in the stuff coming out the hole.
Yes.
But we had to stop because it was just too dark. So we spent all night just sort of pondering our futures. And then 6 o'clock the next morning we started, and we hit it. and I drove
At 160?
At 160 metres. And I drove the samples back to Perth in the back of my Land Cruiser on the weekend. And as I was driving back, the star Sirius was rising above me, which was a bit weird.
As a sign.
And when I did drive back, I'd lodged our quarterly report with the ASX before going out to drill this hole. And getting back into mobile range, I got a please explain letter from the ASX basically saying, we don't think you're a going concern anymore. Why should we not delist you?
Goodness me.
Yeah. So it was a close run thing.
Well, how did it unfold? You took the samples down?
Yeah. So we took the samples down. At that time, these XRF guns that you can zap samples with and get you an instant result were pretty new. So we didn't have one, but Creasy did. And we went round to his warehouse on a Sunday morning and started zapping the samples. And, you know, they were going 4%, 5%, 3%, 5%. And we were all pretty happy. And Creasy was just sort of sitting there with a straight face. And I said, come on, Mark, be happy. He said, the last time I was happy was in 1976. And then we went into a trading halt, got the proper assays which confirmed it, put the release out. Then it was just Diggers and Dealers by coincidence, and I got invited to Diggers and Dealers by the Hartley's guys. And I was literally standing outside the forecourt at Diggers and Dealers with hundreds of people around me wanting to look at these drill samples. And, you know, we'd already gone up 5 or 10 times by then.
Yes.
And as that was happening, I had my young junior geo on the rig to drill the follow-up holes, and he was drilling them and getting nothing and was sort of despairing. And I said, no, just hold your nerve, keep on drilling. And then at about the third hole after that, he started hitting it again, and then it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. But there was a moment where I had to use the best poker face I've ever had.
In front of hundreds of people at Diggers and Dealers.
Yeah.
But this is significant because, you know, one drill hole was the start.
Yeah.
And you had to back it up and you kept going.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's when it just was proven. It kept coming. Tell me about the Diggers and Dealers. Were people just beside themselves with the discovery?
Yes. We probably stoked the fire a bit because we were pretty confident that we were onto something special. So
yes.
the actual and title of the ASX announcement was New Discovery, New Deposit Style, New Province. So that got people excited.
Yeah, yeah. So you got an audience pretty easily.
Yeah, yeah.
So you did the drilling, came up with the result. I just want to focus for a minute here on being the geologist, the exploration geologist who's been out there for a couple of years. You're down to your last cents. It takes a lot of hard work. And, you know, there's the old Gary Player saying of the harder you work, the luckier you get. I don't know if that always applies with mining because you can work hard and you just don't get lucky.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stories like that. But in this case, how would you apply that to what you did? I mean, there's all that sort of accumulated experience came to the fore. Or do you put an element of luck in there too?
Oh, there always has to be some luck because we could have drilled one of those other 2 holes 50 metres either way and missed it and nobody would know about Nova.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's luck so-called luck that you can control, which is where opportunity meets preparation. And then there's that extra little bit of secret sauce that just sometimes happens.
Yes. Would you say your approach to exploration is you just go hard at it? You don't hold back?
Yeah, in a sense, you've got to just be prepared. You've got to be prepared to fail.
Yeah.
If you're not prepared to fail, you'll never succeed. And a lot of people, when it comes to it, aren't prepared to fail.
Yeah.
They'll do things logically, rationally, scientifically, but aren't just prepared to, you know, do that one thing that is completely unknown.
Which can have the result.
Yeah.
So you got straight into it. From that point on, Sirius just cranked up. And, I mean, I know the next 2 years was drilling, feasibility, marketing, organisational growth, financing, the full gamut.
Yeah.
Do you look back at that as a bit of a blur?
Oh, completely. I remember once with people we'll both know who were at Hartley's at the time, I think I did 40 meetings in 6 countries in 5 days, something like that.
Is that right?
Yeah. And that just didn't stop. So when I was in the zone, it was fine. It's a bit like sports, I get. When you're in the zone, you can do it.
Yes.
But if you stop, it's really hard to get back into it. So I was in the zone for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And, yeah, no work-life balance. It was just 110% work.
Yes.
So, you know, a lot of caffeine, a lot of adrenaline.
Yeah.
And it only stopped, really, with the takeover.
So, but you did start the development and construction.
Yeah.
And that was in full swing, wasn't it?
Absolutely. You know, we did the drill out. We went from 1 to 7 rigs in 2 weeks. We did the scoping. Well, we missed the scoping study. It was so obvious it was going to be a mine. We didn't need one. We went straight to feasibility.
Right.
Permitting, financing, we raised, you know, probably 600 million in equity and 600 in debt. The deposit was so good, we gave the term sheet to the banks and said, if you change anything, you're not going to be invited.
Yes.
Off-take agreements with Glencore and BHP and Trafigura, you name it. Construction, the whole thing. And literally, we took it from discovery drill hole to starting the portal in 2.5 years.
Wow. Wow, that's fast.
Yeah, I think it may be one of the fastest ever.
Yeah. So IGO came knocking September 2015, as I said, acquired the business for 1.8 billion. And was Mark smiling at that point?
Yes.
I'm glad. So it's another classic, as we said earlier, it's another classic. It's really, you know, you look at Lion Ore and that takeover, well, this is 7 million market cap to 1.8 billion. Well, for the listener, no surprises. In 2013, Mark received his second Prospector of the Year award from AMEC for the Nova and Bollinger discoveries in Western Australia. I think, Mark, I was just looking through that award list, you may be the only person who's received it twice.
I'm the only individual. I think there's someone who's, as part of a team, has received it twice.
Right, okay, yeah. You would be the only person from Birmingham to receive it twice.
Or once.
Or once. But, well, congratulations. I mean, it's just such a wonderful story. And the Sirius story is pretty much legendary. And on the back of it, you and Mark and IGO, you know, it's all part of it. And it's become a fantastic story. So it's really such an opportunity to be able to share it for us. So thank you.
Oh, no problem. And, you know, there are so many little stories along the way as well. You know, people think of mining companies and the people running them as being privileged or whatever, but we were out there in the dirt and the dust and the heat, and we had a lot of retail shareholders who made a fortune. I reckon we probably created 100 millionaires. When we found Bollinger, the second ore body after Nova, we started receiving crates of Bollinger champagne weekly from people we'd never met because we'd changed their lives. And that was one of the great things about it.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
When you look at that from the perspective of a budding geologist, and you've had 2 significant discoveries, okay? If you look at that, the first round when you were named Prospector of the Year with Thunderbox and the nickel discovery, and then here we are again with Nova and Bollinger. What would you say to a budding geologist in terms of everyone's dream would be to do 1, let alone 2?
I think you just got to be dumb enough to keep doing it in a good way.
Yes.
You know, I look back on where I've ended up compared to people who were smarter than me at Western Mining, and they were probably more concerned with a formal career progression or job title or perks and things like that and status within the company. And that sort of stuff didn't do much for me. I just did the stuff that they probably didn't want to do.
Yes.
And persisted.
Yeah.
And if that's what you want to do, you just got to have the passion as well as the intuition and the science.
Would you say you need to be able to be willing to take on the tough times to appreciate the good times?
Oh yeah, and there are more tough times than good times.
That's probably my point. Is it's obvious, but you know, it doesn't come easy.
No,
from what you could see here in this as an example.
And it's not for everyone either. You know, some really good geos are better suited to big companies. If you haven't got an appetite for risk and are comfortable living that way, and your sort of family situation is such that you're not going to sell the farm, then it's for you. But otherwise, it's not.
Just quickly then, Can you put it into perspective how you see work-life balance?
Well,
I don't think it was too balanced through that couple of years at Sirius when you were
and
flat out, as you say, like 110% work the whole time to the point where it became a blur.
Yeah, and, you know, my family did suffer during that time. I was away a lot. We had 3 young boys, and Kathy was essentially a single parent looking after them whilst I was away.
Yes.
So there was a consequence for that, which I'm trying to atone for now. But even now, unless you're prepared to give it your all, you're not going to succeed. So you can't just do this as a 9 to 5 thing.
No. Thanks, Mark. So when Sirius wrapped up, it was part of IGO. Did you have a break?
I had a quick break and I did a couple of things. You know, going back to sort of hiking and stuff like that when I was young, I thought I'd go off to the Dolomites in Italy and do some climbing.
Yes.
I went on my own. I went without any communications, any information to anybody about where I was going or where I'd be. No backup plans, no emergency routes and stuff like that, and just sort of tested myself in the mountains.
Oh, yeah. And what did you learn?
When you're on your own, you think about your decisions a lot more because there's no safety net.
Yes.
And there were a few moments, again, sort of sliding door moments again, in a way, which showed me that circumstances can cause you to make completely different decisions. So there was one occasion when I was climbing up this mountain. I got to a fork in the road, literally and metaphorically. One way was up to the peak and the other was sort of the easy way down. And I was contemplating whether I should do this because it was risky. There was snow and blizzards and all sorts of stuff. So I was trying to weigh up the odds of what I should do. And then out of the mist came this figure coming up the mountain. And there was this woman doing the same thing as me.
Yes.
And she said, "Come on, let's go and do it. It's easy." So I thought, okay, I'll go up and do that. And we were walking up this thing and there's, sort of 1,000-metre cliffs either side.
Narrow track.
Yeah, like about a foot wide.
Goat track.
Yeah. And ice and no ice axe or crampons and everything. Got to the top, whiteout conditions, had to sort of come down on our bums eventually. And when we sort of got out of that, she said, "I'm really glad you came along because I would have never have done that otherwise."
She didn't know what you were thinking.
Yeah, we were both thinking the same of one another,
yeah.
and it caused a completely different outcome.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I just want to also talk about music. Music's been a big part of your life. I know back in Birmingham we were talking offline how you really loved music, guitar, and you were part of bands, and it was obviously you wanted to be a rock star in your early days.
As you do.
Yeah, you ever do. And, I know that this has been a part of your life that's been really important, and you end up renewing that after the Sirius experience and getting back into it.
Yeah. Well, in that period, sort of when I was sort of unemployed some of the time and scrabbling around with those little jobs, I was in various bands as well. We tried to get a record deal. We had a manager and so on. I eventually, reluctantly thought there's no future in this.
Yes.
I've got to get a proper job and I've got to go to Australia to get one. So that's what I did. And my mate sort of didn't and persisted, and he ended up being the lead guitarist in Bush.
Bush?
Yeah.
Now, Bush, they sang that hit song Glycerine.
Yes. Yeah.
That could have been you, Mark. Oh, no regrets, I'm sure.
No.
You prefer to have found Nova.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm still in the rock business.
Yeah, you are. Good point.
Yeah, so I didn't really do much more until fairly recently, and through a friendship with an Aboriginal mate of mine, Tony Shaw, and his friends in a band called the Yabu Band.
Right.
Who were Australian Band of the Year, I think, at one stage, and WA Single of the Year and stuff like this. I ended up playing with them on Australia Day in front of, 10 or 20,000 people on the Perth foreshore supporting Gurrumal.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. That was great. That was
a great
fantastic.
experience.
Yeah.
Gosh. Did you want to change your mind then after that and think I could become a permanent rock star, or should I say aspiring rock star?
Part of me did, but part of me was a bit more realistic. I thought, no, I'm a bit too old for this.
Well, you kept kicking rocks, so to speak, and then there's a lot tie up here with Sirius and your current role and current company, which is S2 Resources. Tell us a little bit about that, because it comes back to your view on how the shareholders were looked after in the Sirius transaction and then how S2 formed from there.
Yeah, part of the IGO transaction was that the Sirius shareholders got a pro rata shareholding in S2, and S2 was spun out.
Right.
And we kept pretty well all of the assets other than Nova, which is what IGO wanted. So S2 started life in a good spot with a bunch of shareholders who are all aligned, understanding what we do, understanding the risk, understanding the timeframes, and already very happy because they'd made a lot of money. So that gave S2 an unusual opportunity to go out looking for big things and get given the time and the money and the trust to do that. So,
Yes.
you know, we're lucky compared to a lot of juniors who have to just, you know, chase a hot commodity to raise money to survive and never get ahead of the game, in that we can operate a bit more like the exploration division of one of the older sort of big companies. And that allows us to be strategic and look for the big things, because our shareholders, they want another return like Nova, not something more modest. So that sort of sets the whole flavour of the company.
Well, that company has been well noted for its particular interest in Fosterville. Now, for the listener, Fosterville is home to the Agnico Eagle mining lease, which was formerly known as Kirkland Lake. And that contains one of the highest grade gold deposits in Australia, correct, Mark?
Yeah, the Swan Zone that they discovered was pretty well the highest grade gold deposit in Australia, 50 grams a tonne, and the lowest cost producer, probably less than 400 all-in sustaining costs an ounce. So they were producing 500,000 ounces a year. They had to expand their gold room 3 times.
Goodness.
Yeah.
That is amazing. So let's talk about S2 with regards to the tenement package that was surrounding the Agnico Eagle mining lease and how that has impacted S2, because I just want to take that back in terms of your shareholders that experienced the Nova success. Now, here we are with S2, and this is really interesting in terms of you've got that high-grade gold deposit, and then the ground around it, it's come up for grabs.
Yeah.
Now, can you just tell us a little bit about that story and how it actually came on your radar?
Yeah, it's a funny one. I was over in Victoria when COVID happened and the borders of WA closed and they wouldn't allow me back home. So I was there for a year. And during that time, there was a tender for the ground around Fosterville, which had expired. So Kirkland Lake,
So that was a government tender?
Yeah, Kirkland Lake owned the ground. They realised it was going to expire. They went hard exploring it, spent probably $30 million, hoping that they could keep hold of the ground. But when it expired. And the government put that and several other blocks of ground into a moratorium and then into a tender process. So dozens of companies applied for that ground.
Was it hotly contested?
Probably the most hotly contested bit of ground in Australia.
Yes.
Yeah. Right next door to the richest gold mine in Australia.
Yes.
And we put in a bid in the tender for 3 of the 4 blocks, one of which was the gem, the bit of ground directly surrounding the mine on all sides. And it took a while and we forgot about it. Whilst I was stuck in Victoria, the results were announced and we found we'd won the tender, much to our astonishment.
Did you go into there confident that you were able to match it with the other competitors?
Oh, quite the opposite. You know, we had all the big boys were there, the Newmonts, Newcrests, Agnico Eagle, you name it. And we were just a junior.
Yes.
And part of the tender was based on how much you were going to spend on the ground. And we couldn't compete with those guys.
No.
And part was based on other things, sort of social and governance and environmental type criteria.
Yes.
And I think in hindsight, what we found out is despite the fact that other people offered 6 times more cash than we did, we won it on the traditional owner vote, which was 25% of the weighting of the tender because of the good work we'd done previously with Sirius.
That's very interesting. And that enabled you, and clearly the government, the selection panel gave more weighting to that than actual dollars.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, you know, we do that because that's what we want to do anyway. It's the right thing to do, but it's actually an example of ESG having a tangible dollar value.
An impact.
Yeah.
At the same time, Am I right that you had also got involved with Chalice?
Yes, well, literally 2 days before we found we'd won the tender, I was sitting twiddling my thumbs under lockdown in COVID-ridden Victoria, and I got a tap on the shoulder from Alex at Chalice saying, we're spinning off our Victorian gold assets. Do you want to be chairman? And I said, yeah, sure. I'm not doing anything else in Victoria. I'm not conflicted, so go for it. So I signed up, and then 2 days later I found that S2 had won the Fosterville tender.
So suddenly you were chair of two of the highest profile Victorian gold explorers.
Yeah.
Gosh, when it
Thanks
rains,
to
it
COVID.
pours. Yeah, go. So I understand Kathy at this point had said, well, with COVID locking you in, suddenly you've got two quite significant roles that they decided, well, doesn't look like you're coming back. We'll move over to you.
Yeah.
And they came over to Melbourne.
They did. I tried to get back with the G2G pass 4 or 5 times, but got knocked back every time.
Right.
The fact that I lived in Perth, worked in Perth, had a company in Perth, a family in Perth, and a house in Perth was irrelevant. So
yeah,
I was staying in Victoria, and they said, right, if you're not coming to us, we're coming to you. So I became an accidental Victorian.
And still are.
Yeah.
So how are you finding it with S2? Putting aside the fact that you have got a pretty hotly contested bit of ground, you've been successful on that point, you're now drilling and you're seeing some success?
Yes, we're only on the 6th hole that we've drilled, which is nothing.
Right.
And really the aim of that drilling is just to get our bearings with the geology, not to actually hit the mother lode.
Yes.
But we have actually had some gold hits along the way too, which is all icing on the cake. So early days, but looking good.
Good. I just want to then, when I look at S2 and your history, and you sort of put it into perspective earlier, but family, it's played a really important part in your life from early childhood with the impact of what you went through, and then you left home early, and now, your time on the road, you've put a lot into your career. Just tell us a little bit about that, maybe expanding on where we were before, but just understanding the impact it can have. And I'm saying this more for other people, not so much to dig deep into your life, but just, the challenges.
Yeah, making sure your family stays together and is happy and healthy is a big challenge when you're away from it a lot. And people tend to sort of look at you and as a one-dimensional thing and not realise you might have other aspects to your life, whether it be the music or family or whatever. But during all of the Sirius heyday, one of my sons got into drugs and bad company and ended up in a pretty serious situation. And I was away for a lot of that. So my wife was left to deal with all of that on her own a lot, and that took a toll on her as well.
Yeah.
Things are coming good now, which is great.
Good.
But there was more stress from that than there's ever been with any takeover or deal or anything else. Dealing with that just puts everything else into perspective and makes everything else easier in a way.
Yeah. And I think that's where, we were talking offline about it. You can be faced with some pretty significant business challenges or decisions to make, but they pale into insignificance to a degree relative to these other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And people, I guess, will interpret what I just said in different ways. But when I mean problematic, I mean he ended up in pretty bad situation, but he's coming good now.
I'm really, really happy to hear that. That's great, Mark. And thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I think you see people from a distance, you don't know what's really going on in their lives, and people maybe hide a lot of stuff, but I think it's good to not hide it so that people can relate. The more you talk about it to people, the more you realise other people are having similar experiences as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mark, we've covered a fair bit of ground. I just, when you look back at your career, what are the highlights when you just think about it now? Not taking away from the point that you're still heavily engaged with S2 and have a lot of excitement and opportunity with that business and that company, but just where we are at now. Here we are, 2024. You've come a long way. What do you look back and highlights that might be just worth looking back on?
There's a real mixed bag of type of highlights. So, finding Thunderbox, which was the first big one, was pretty good. Finding Nova, which was so exceptional, was just next level, really. when you drill, you expect to find 2 or 3 metres of nickel sulfide when you drill a hole looking for that. And then you get 10, then you get 20, then you get 40, then you get 60 metres at 5%. It's like beyond your wildest dreams.
Yes.
And when you see that core coming out of the drill rods, and you're the first to ever see it, ever, and you realise how valuable it is, it's a real buzz.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of discovery type highlights. But there are other things as well, like I mentioned, getting crates of champagne from people whose lives we'd changed. That was great. And also we had a guy working for us, Bill Cunningham, who helped us with our offtake deals. And he started work with us at the age of 76.
Is that right?
Yeah, and he said it was the best job he'd ever had.
Good on him.
So when you get feedback like that, you know you've got something right.
Oh, that's great. You know, to recap on that, you've had some people who have influenced you on the journey. We've covered a few of them, but just if we went back, let's start with your mum.
Yeah, thinking I was slightly odd, collecting rock samples and putting them in a suitcase to bring them back from holiday. So she helped me along the way there.
What a great part of that story. Let me talk about school. What about school when you look at that?
Well, you know, I sort of enjoyed school, but there's always a teacher you don't particularly get on with, and mine was the physics teacher. And he took a dislike to me for some reason. And I remember him saying to me in class one day, he said, "Bennett, you'll never be anything more than a garbage collector." So that sort of galvanised me into action. Whether that was his intent or not, I'm not sure.
What if I said Western Mining Corporation?
Oh, look, Chris Bonwick is brilliant. He's one of a kind. He's the only person I've seen who gets so enthusiastic and excited that he smokes 2 cigarettes at once. And then Roy Woodall, of course, because Roy was just a legend.
What about others in that journey? Mark Creasy?
Yeah, well, you know, Mark is quite a character. He's his own man. He's difficult to get to know. And there's lots of people always knocking on his door for money, so he's very guarded. But when you get on the inside, he's great company. And for him to be prepared to choose me to put his ground into that company for the first time ever, that was you know, pretty good.
Oh, yeah. Is there anyone else in that bracket?
Look, along the way, we engaged Gray Edgerton Warburton as a corporate advisor for Sirius. And I would hate to be on the pointy end of Gray, but having him on your side of the table is fantastic. And he's a really great guy. And I learnt so much from him about markets and deals and so on, that sort of set me up as something other than a geologist.
Fantastic. I assume that the board, you know, in terms of Sirius and that sort of thing.
Yep. So, you know, we put Jeff Dowling on as chairman of Sirius. And I don't know if he knows it, but his nickname is Junkyard Dog. He was managing partner at EY for quite a while.
Right.
And kept everybody in shape. And Jeff's got a great but very dry sense of humour. But he's always given me good advice as chairman of Sirius, and now he's a director of S2. So he's great as a sounding board.
Yeah. All right. And then I suppose without doubt, Kathy would have to get a mention as well, given that you've taken her from Birmingham all the way to Kalgoorlie, down to Perth, across to Melbourne.
Yeah. You know, when I sort of took a bank loan to get that ticket to Adelaide, she was foolish enough to come with me and sort of have faith in a loser. So, she's been there for the entire journey. She was there looking after the kids when I wasn't. She's amazing. She's only small of stature, but she's a lion, and she's very tough. She's recently actually had cancer, but is in recovery from that. So she's fought through that as well. That sort of put the professional stuff into perspective as well. But now she's getting better. I'm sort of back in the ring again.
Shout out to Kathy.
Yep.
And that's great to hear. Mark, this has been some chat, and I said this at the start, but, you know, what an adventure. You've come from the other side of the world. And I must say, bluntly, your passion for your craft, for the listener, I can see it in the way he smiles about, the way he talks about his job, the way he is so engaged in what he does. We talked about gut feel. Intelligence plays a part. Your ability to work hard, learn quickly, persevere, take some risk. Your knowledge has resulted in an incredible career. Those two highly regarded Prospector of the Year awards were over 10 years apart. And along with the commercial success, I would say that that's a big testament to what you've achieved over your life and the way you've gone about it. So, Mark, on behalf of Euros Hartley's Finding the Front, thanks a lot for coming and seeing us on your trip over from Melbourne. We really do appreciate it. It's been a wonderful chat, as I said, and we do wish you all the very best going forward. So thanks.
Thanks very much. It's been great to talk about something other than just a formal presentation.
Good on you, mate. Cheers.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Euros Hartley's Finding the Front. This podcast is for general information purposes only. Please check out euroshartleys.com for more information. Euros Hartleys holds Australian Financial Services Licence 230052.